Hi, and welcome to the Kale Houser Leadership Secrets podcast. Today, I want to ask, am I making you uncomfortable? Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Kale Houser Leadership Secrets podcast. My name is Kale Houser. Thank you so much for joining me today. Hey, I was thinking about this experience that I had back in my college days, attending university for my, I guess third or fourth time, whenever it was, when I actually went to college to get my degree. And I had this professor that was really interesting. He was a nice guy, super nice guy, PhD, very smart, very intelligent, and he actually worked for him as part-time as like a lab assistant. Helped him build some equipment and things that I was way underqualified to do. And he should have supervised me way more because I just wasn't into it, and I feel kind of bad about that. Here we are years later that I wasted some of his grant money and did not provide him a good product. But that's not the point of this story. The point of this story is this particular professor, while a very nice gentleman, he would help you out if you had issues with the classwork or homework and all that kind of stuff. You could absolutely go to him and he'd be willing to kind of walk you through it and all that kind of stuff. But he was just kind of an awkward guy to be around, awkward socially, right? And that you get a lot of that in the engineering world in general, because that's just kind of the natural tendency of people that are drawn to that for the most part. Don't necessarily have a lot of the social skills. It's not quite the same culture as the rest of the university. And I think I've talked about this in previous episodes of my experience when I had to take a music class as one of my electives and went down to the music department for one of my classes, and how it was like a totally different world than the engineering department. But anyway, so this particular professor, beyond just being a little bit awkward, I mean, he was approachable, absolutely, but there were times where in our particular building that had most of the engineering students in it, there were study, not halls, but like areas, foyers that had desks, and I even donated a couch to it one time where we would kind of hang out and do homework and all that kind of stuff. And he'd kind of randomly walk by because their offices, all the professors' offices, or at least some of them were up there, and he'd make just kind of weird off-the-wall comments that I'm sure in his brain it made sense, but in the context of a social setting, it wasn't so much. Not that it was inappropriate, it was just kind of like, okay, kind of strange. And then he was also known, after he would make these comments, it was kind of this mix of like a laugh or a chuckle, but also with just that uncomfortableness. He'd be like, oh yeah, so-and-so, and he'd kind of do that. And it was really interesting. And it was funny for that aspect of it because it was so socially awkward. But he was really known for this one thing that became, like, it didn't bother me so much, but it was distracting, absolutely. And fortunately, there weren't a lot of females in our class because, again, engineering doesn't attract a lot of females to it, at least not in the school that I went to. And he would, while he was teaching up on the board, so he'd, up in the front of the class, whatever class it was that he was teaching, he taught several different ones, he would start kind of, and I know you can't if you're listening to this podcast, but, definitely watch the YouTube on this, but he would start kind of rubbing his belly a little bit. Nothing aggressive, but just kind of, he'd start by just kind of, that's where he naturally would hold his hand, which is kind of on his belly, kind of like maybe palm over the belly button kind of level. And so where we went to, it was very common that the professors, they wore, either a polo shirt or just a short sleeve button down shirt and shorts. Like, it wasn't, definitely not high class by any stretch. It was very casual for the professors. So, he would just kind of, as he was teaching, and if he would turn around and if he was explaining some subject, he'd kind of just hold his hand right there. No big deal. But as the class would go on, pretty soon he'd start kind of rubbing his belly a little bit or patting his belly. And then pretty soon he'd kind of put his hand inside, like if he was wearing a button-down shirt, he'd kind of tuck his fingers in between the buttons, like in his shirt a little bit, right? And it was all like he wasn't doing it on purpose. It was just something to, right, the classic Ricky Bobby, like, I don't know what to do with my hands. And that's what he was doing. But then the more he was going on and as he would get into a subject and explaining it to us as a class, and again, there's like, 15, 20 of us all watching him at the front of this class, his hand would kind of go up under his shirt. So now, now he's kind of holding his belly, rubbing his belly with his raw skin with his hand inside his shirt, like above his waistband. It was fascinating to watch because, again, I don't think he consciously knew that he was doing it. But as he was getting going, I'm not going to do it for the camera because nobody really wants to see my belly, but his hand would start to rise up to where he was almost rubbing his chest, like his sternum. And he wasn't like rubbing his nipples or anything like that. And again, he wasn't doing it for any sensation of, pleasure. It was just, that's what he was doing with his hands. And it was only one hand. It was only ever one hand. But he would ride, again, hand under his shirt up on his chest. And as you can imagine, right, that lifts your shirt to where like the whole bottom of his belly is showing to the class. And he wasn't a bad looking man. He was a younger gentleman, all things considered, for that, and he wasn't out of shape by any stretch. He was actually quite fit for being an engineering professor. But it was so odd that it started kind of to make people uncomfortable. But it wasn't that uncomfortable so much that people were complaining about it, because we all understood it was just this kind of weird tick that he had, this weird mannerism that he had of. I think it kind of helped him think. Some people they wrap their fingers to help them think. Some people hold their chin, and to help them think, or tap their, whatever it is. That's kind of how he processed information. But as I was thinking through this, imagine if he were doing that, if you say he got promoted to the department head of our engineering school, or the dean of engineering, whatever that is, and imagine he's making this presentation to, maybe the alumni association or some big important thing where he is the authority in that setting, beyond just being the authority of a professor in a college class, right? Which has its own authority, but it's a different kind. I think we understand that difference. And the perception that would impart. And the reality is, despite really having no bad intentions with it, that mannerism would it would undermine his authority. It would undermine his credibility. And this is what I want to ask you. As the business leader, as the owner, as the manager, supervisor, CEO, founder of your company, in your company, are there things that you're doing subconsciously as a tick that are undermining your authority by the virtue of changing the perception that people have of you? Okay, so people developed a perception of this professor not based on his intellect, not based on his ability to teach, not based on his willingness to teach or help others learn, or his expertise or anything of that nature. We started to kind of develop this reputation just purely based on his social mannerisms and tics. Because it even got to the point that if you went to him like one-on-one for his office hours to get help with something, he would kind of do the same thing, because he was really, thinking and trying to get you to work through these engineering problems, right? As you would kind of expect. And I could see how, if you're a female student, a young college-age female student, that would be a problem. And as far as I'm aware, at least in the couple of years that I was there before I graduated and moved on, no one ever talked to him about it or did anything about it, which is, kind of portrays the innocence of the situation. But it definitely created a reputation for him, and not that it was a bad reputation, but just not a serious reputation, if that makes sense, because of this social tick. And I wanted to ask you, are there things you're doing that are making other people uncomfortable around you, to the point that it's undermining your actual authority in your workplace or in your business, in your leadership position? And that's something you really need to think about. Maybe you're completely unaware of it. Ask somebody. Do you have a trusted, whether it be a confidant or a business partner, say, hey, Jeff, I just want to make sure. I got some odd looks when I was doing that presentation the other day, right? As I've become aware of this and I'm starting to observe reactions to me as I'm out and about. Like, is there something that I do that's maybe kind of weird that I don't realize I do? Like, hey, I trust you. help me out here, right? You come to them from a like, I need help. Or if you are doing those types of presentations or a speaking gig or something, record it and watch it. Actually watch it and look for those things. Be analytical and critical of yourself, constructive criticism of yourself, to where you can correct those in order to present this kind of whole package, between your intellect and experience, how you dress, how you present, how you speak, all those types of things, whether that's from your morning meetings with your team or you're presenting at some conference in front of, thousands of people potentially. Those are all things that you need to work on and be aware of. And that's really the point of this episode of this podcast, is to help you, if you weren't already, to at least get it in your brain to start looking for it. And maybe there isn't. I'm not saying everyone does, but a lot of people do, and they just don't realize it because that is something they've developed over the years, whether it's to help them think or process information. It's kind of like the extreme of like when I'm looking for an answer, I look up, and try to like find it in the back of my brain by rolling my eyes one way or another. But you're taking it to that extreme of trying to stimulate, stimulate energy or thoughts or actions with some sort of physical action. And that's really what you need to be cautious about. And if it's something that you do find and you kind of come to that realization, work through it, talk to other people. Like, how can I get over this? Like, I've been doing this for years. I don't know how to not do that. And, make fun of it. You can even, if it is something innocent, you can even bring it up at the beginning. Like, hey, everybody, I'm really bad at tapping my fingers. So if I start all of a sudden in the middle of our presentation, really start tapping and it gets to be annoying, give me a wink, and I'll do my best to kind of control it, or we'll, slap my hand, something of that nature. Just, it doesn't have to be so dramatic or such a big deal, other than just kind of working to improve ourselves, just a little bit each day. So that's what I want to leave with you today as you work through that and think about it. Ask your spouse, ask your kids. Kids are great ways. They're usually fairly honest when they're like, yeah, Dad, you're pretty, you do that all the time. Or, you have a facial tic. You got a little shoulder shrug that you do all the time when you're really agitated or something of that nature. And it may be things that come out with emotion, with some, whether it be agitation or anger or worry or all those types of things. We absolutely can kind of fall back into those kind of little things that go on with our bodies as we experience these different levels of intellect, or not intellect, but levels of stimulation or lack thereof. All right, everybody. Hey, have a fantastic afternoon, no matter where you're at in the world. We'll talk to you soon. Bye.